I'd like to welcome all the guests that have taken the time to be here with us today. Good morning to some of you. Good afternoon to some of you. I'm assuming you are hearing me well and also seeing the screen. If not, please let me know in the chat. This is the official launch of the study, the impact of a shift in global demand for leather on Brazilian slaughterhouse. And well, just to make sure, this study is available in our website as well as in RFN websites. And a lot of people have been writing me asking if the same study that we launched last year. Well, it's not. The study that NINT launched last year was focused on the beef industry. This one's focused on the leather industry. So it's a totally different matter, but both are available in our website, right? And well, before we start, I will introduce our speakers today. So starting by myself, my name is Cristóvão. I'm the head of ESG research at NINT. NINT is the largest ESG research house in Brazil. And this study was developed by NINT with the support of the Rainforest Foundation Norway, and commissioned by the Rainforest Foundation Norway. And representing RFN, we have here Tim Steinberg. Tim, would like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks so much, Cristóvão. So my name is Tim Steinberg. I'm a responsible finance advisor at the Rainforest Foundation Norway. Cristóvão, do you want me to give a little bit of background as to why we asked you to conduct a study, or do you want to do an intro of the other speaker first?
Yeah, I think you can introduce our special speaker first. José Pulgas with here. José Pulgas, would like to say a few words about yourself?
Sure. I'm not the star today, the star study and team for sure, but my name is José Pulgas. I'm the senior partner at JGP Asset Management, one of the largest asset management firms in Brazil. And I lead all our efforts in nature-based solutions, in sustainable investments and engagement. And it's a pleasure as a Brazilian to be here discussing a topic that is so essential for our economy and for sure our future as a society and as a protagonist, a country that can be a protagonist on this green economy. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you, José. Tim?
Thanks so much. Let me pull up my screen real quick. So let me really briefly introduce you to who we are and why we have commissioned the study that Cristóvão will present. So we're the Rainforest Foundation Norway. We're an international civil society organization headquartered in Oslo in Norway, with a dual mandate to work to protect both the large remaining contiguous rainforests around the world, as well as to protect the rights of indigenous people that inhabit those forests. We have programs in 6 different rainforest countries, namely Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Democratic Republic of Congo, Peru, Colombia, and then Brazil. In addition to 2 programs that work on an international level. One of those programs is run by the team that I sit on, named the Deforestation-Free Markets team, that looks at the international supply chains and the financial sector as drivers of global deforestation, having an evidence-based advocacy strategy to try to halt deforestation driven by international commodity supply chains. So one of the commodities that has been a focus of our work has been the global leather supply chain. The primary reason is that cattle is the single largest economic driver of deforestation in the Amazon. Cattle obviously produces beef, but it also produces leather. And whereas beef is primarily consumed domestically in Brazil or exported to China, the European Union is actually an important destination market for the exported leather from Brazil. And leather export represents roughly 80% of all the production. So we published the research back about 2 years ago in the spring of 2021 that specifically looked at the role of the European automotive industry as a driver of global demand for Brazilian leather and thus its exposure to deforestation. That study, among its most notable findings, was that the companies within that supply chain essentially at the time had no policies, no systems, no commitments in place to ensure the deforestation-free nature of the leather that it used primarily in car seats. Now, that has been the foundation of a range of different strategies that we have explored since. One of them is that we were part of a wider NGO network that called for the inclusion of leather within the scope of the EU deforestation regulation, which was agreed upon late last year. And in addition to that, we actively engage with companies in this supply chain, as well as with the investors that hold shares in companies in the automotive supply chain. So we coordinate a investor working group towards a deforestation-free automotive industry, in addition to other forms of advocacy and engagement. So the motivation for us to commission this particular study to NINT and Cristóval's team was really that we wanted to have a forward-looking analysis to really understand how potential future shifts in global leather demand may affect the profitability of slaughterhouses and meatpacking companies. And the underlying thinking of that was really twofold. On the one hand, we wanted to understand what were the impacts of some of the measures in the more downstream phase of this supply chain. So with the end user companies and with the demand side market regulations, understanding how that may impact the cattle industry and ultimately the pressure that it creates on forests. So it's to with the assumption that these impacts are primarily economic, we were looking at a profitability study. And then secondly, we also wanted to identify what may be some of the risks stemming from this transition towards a low carbon and a deforestation-free global economic system, both for companies and investors. What are those risks? Where are they located? How big are they? Who may be exposed to them? This is some of the questions that we had. And ultimately, all of this work is really done to create an evidence base in order to be able to do effective and targeted advocacy, both in the EU and elsewhere. I'll stop here and I'll pass it back to Cristóval to discuss some of the findings of the study. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. And within the following minutes, I will be talking about the content of the studies and the main outcomes that we reached. And after that, we'll have a couple of questions to further discuss these issues with José Pulgas. And you also are welcome to have your question and write them in the chat. And if you have the time, we'll be able to discuss and go over that, right? So let me share my screen again. Well, this is a bit of a motivation of this study. Tim talked a little bit about that, and the main objective of this study was to assess whether some restriction demand for leather will affect the economics of slaughterhouses and meatpacking companies in Brazil. And why slaughterhouse? It's important to say that slaughterhouses and meatpacking companies are an important tie in this complex supply chain industry. They basically are connecting the rural producer, where the risk of deforestation really occurs, to the consumers, to the downstream part of this industry. So, well, it's very important to understand how they operate their economics, because the method that we adopted in this study was to conduct financial economic analysis to understand whether this restriction from leather exports from Brazil to European Union and also to other regions would affect these sites, these industries. Well, and the motivations to do that are well known. So we have increasing deforestation rates in the Amazon, and is mainly driven by cattle production. So we have a study from the mapeou biomas that shows that 90% of all deforested area in the Amazon is or was pasture in the past, right? Also, the Amazon region in Brazil holds 40% of cattle production and slaughtering capacity. So we start to have an idea that might be a correlation between these two things, right? And as Tim highlighted before, differently than beef, which the main destination is for domestic consumption or exports to China. When we talk about leather, we have about 22% of its exports destined to the European Union. So the European Union is, in fact, an important market for these commodities. And well, it's going to be used in luxury automobile industry. It's going to be used in furniture and footwear and other consumer goods industry. And well, it's important also to highlight that the cattle supply chain is very complex. So it involves rural producers, slaughterhouses, meat packing companies, tanneries, trading companies, consumer goods industry. And when you talk about leather, it gets even more difficult because you're including the tanneries, you're including footwears, furnitures, automobile brands. So it's really hard to trace the origin of this cattle back to this sourcing, right? And of course, you have to highlight there's practice like cattle laundering, right? Which is like a corrupt practice to hide where the cattle has been produced. So these are all reasons that make the traceability of this production even harder. And well, to do this analysis, to understand if there is some economic stimulus to in restriction after the restriction of exports from Brazil to European Union or other regions, what we did was to develop some economic scenarios to understand, firstly, which are the current states of profitability and the market appetites to invest in new slaughterhouses, and how this will be affected in case of the restrictions, right? So here we have the table that pretty much summarize what we did in the study. We came to the conclusion that new deforestation-free product regulation in European Union and also other restrictions to leather use in the world is likely to make many slaughterhouses unprofitable and increase the risk of stranded assets in the sector. And how we came to that conclusion, the first step was to understand how is the economical health of a slaughterhouse operating in Brazil, right? Especially in the Amazon, and realize that the profitability of this business vary very much. So in bad times, you have slaughterhouses making 1% of bottom line of profit margins, and good times you have this slaughterhouse making up to 15% of profit margins, right? And this varies according to several factors, but the most important one is the price of fat cattle, right? Which is the commodity that slaughterhouse buy to conduct its operations. And we projected how this profitability will be affected in case you have the restrictions that we mentioned before. And although we understand that beef is the main source of revenue and profit for slaughterhouses, realize that leather is also, although it's a complementary source of revenue and profit, it's also important for these sites, for these operations to keep profitable, right? And some of the conclusion that you got here is that slaughterhouse operating at less than 14% of profit margins would face negative net present values in face of any of these restrictions, which means that if an investor or a company is planning to expand its slaughterhouse operations and is not expecting to make more than 14% of bottom line of profit margins, this no longer be considered financially viable in face of these restrictions. And it's also important to highlight there is a growing movement and industry that may foster alternative to animal leather. So we have alternatives in the market such as polyurethane, PVC, cork, or other plant-based material that may be replacing the animal leather itself. And we have expectation that the market for synthetic leather will increase by 8% until 2030, right? It's important to make some disclaimers here, right? We understand that this calculation, this financial analysis, would not be applicable to all slaughterhouses that eventually we face some restriction, right? We know that, for example, the European deforestation-free product regulation, they require due diligence procedures. So if we have a slaughterhouse that have all the procedures to monitor and to trace its supply chain, it's not likely to be negatively affected. So although we did this study to understand the potential impacts that the restriction on exports of leather would have on this operation, on these sites, we know that it will not be applicable to all of them. And of course, it can turn to be an opportunity for some slaughterhouses that have good traceability practices, right? And another potential effect that we're not considering here is that even for those slaughterhouses, there are not, they will be no longer be able to export to more restricted markets such as European Union due to a lack of proper due diligence procedures. There could be some like deforestation leakage, as you called it. I mean, this could be exported to other markets. They are not so demanding in terms of environmental and forestation tackling practices, right? And well, another finding that we had in our study, we tried to understand what's the exposure of slaughterhouses to, especially to European markets, especially to the European Union, since this can be considered the most restrictive or demanding market right now for leather exports, right? And we realized that some states, especially Amazonas, which is this one over here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, Maranhão, Tocantins, and Goiás, they are more exposed to European markets, which means that the production of this of slaughterhouses located in these states are a higher share of percentage of the production of the slaughterhouse based in these states are directed to the European Union, right? It's important to realize that some of these states are part of the Amazon biome. So the Amazonas itself, Maranhão and Tocantins, right? And especially Tocantins and Maranhão, they form the Mato Piba region, which is a very well-known region because it concentrates high rates of deforestation in recent years. And it's also important to highlight that these states, they represent 15% of the recent expansion of slaughterhouses in the last 10 years, which means that these are states, they are receiving new investments to produce more beef and leather, and part of this leather will be directed, a relevant part of this leather will be directed to European Union and might be facing restriction whether they do not comply with the proper due diligence procedures, right? Another part of our study was to understand whether this restriction on leather exports will likely impact the large meatpacking companies in Brazil like JBS and Minerva. Of course, we also have Marfrig here, but we didn't have conduct this analysis for Marfrig because the data was not so clear, so we focus on JBS and Minerva. And although we realize that these companies will be less affected due to any restriction in leather exports, given that the exports of leather is not relevant for their revenue, it might as well affect the investment plan of these companies in specific assets, especially those that may not be profitable or financially viable because of the difficulty to export to more restricted regions, right? So we understand that although these companies may not be directly affected by this changing regulation, changing consumer behavior, and so on, they could really be affected. Their investment plan could really be affected, which turned to be a positive outcome of this changing in the demand structure for leather, right? And well, I'd like to share with some of the main takeaways that we got from this study. So we realized that indeed leather is an important factor for slaughterhouses, especially those that are more exposed to the European Union to export. So with the new regulation on deforestation-free products, we understand that Brazilian slaughterhouse may face increased risk of becoming stranded, right? And of course, this will depend on factors such as the current profit levels of the slaughterhouses, their ability to trace their supply chain, their operational flexibility, and of course, since this new this restriction on demand for leather may represent losses to some of the slaughterhouses, might as well represent opportunities for those that are complying with the due diligence procedures and have good traceability practices, right? Well, we understand the restriction letter use may increase over time due to environmental concerns, right? So besides the regulation in the European Union that may trigger regulation in other regions of the world, we also have changing consumer behavior, civil society demands, new technologies, the increasing market share of plant-based leather, and we also have car brands conducting researches to replace leather for other materials such as cactus fiber, mycelium, and other plant-based materials. There's factors that we haven't taken into consideration in this study, and the most important one is the risk of deforestation leakage, which means that, well, if I cannot export no longer my leather to the European Union, I might try to export that to China or sell it domestically. And even though I'll have to bear lower prices, the impact on my net profits will not be that relevant, right? And well, something that I think most of us are still know is that the traceability of cattle is still a relevant issue in the industry. So if you want this cattle industry to be totally clean and deforestation free, we still have to invest and improve the traceability practices in the industry, right? Well, I'll stop sharing my screen now. We already have a couple of questions here, but before that, I'd like to make some questions to our special speaker here. Tim, would like to add something to the?
No, just really briefly, from our perspective, we think these findings that you just presented are really powerful. Because what they ultimately touch on is this concept of an economic tipping point, right? Of previously profitable operations turning into loss-making liabilities. And this is where this whole notion of the stranded assets risk, I think, really comes into play. And that's something that we've really taken note of in your study, in particular when it comes to the figures you present about future investments, right? And the net present value. And I think this is really key for this discussion is to touch on that element. And it also, I mean, reflecting on it from the perspective of, you know, if we look at these commodity supply chains, the way that they drive deforestation is by expansion, right? Deforestation is a factor of sector expansion. And if these type of tipping points are reached so that expansion into new capacity, new operations no longer make economic sense, I think that's just a testament to the potential impact and effectiveness of these type of downstream measures. And I think this is something that we've really taken at heart and just shows that even if leather isn't sort of the main generator of revenue, it's not a byproduct, because it does make the difference between profits and losses. And I think that's really, for us, the key takeaway.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, before we go to the questions from the audience, there's some questions I'd like to ask you to José Pulgas. And well, the first one is that from a buy side perspective, from an asset manager perspective, how do you in JDP in JGP consider or integrate deforestation related risk into your analysis and into your investments?
Perfect. Thank you, Cristóvão. Wonderful presentation. I think there are a lot of things to unpack here. A lot of methodologies to be tackled even before we started, but let's try to focus on the question you proposed. At JGP, we are signatories of many of the commitments, such as the Financial Sector Deforestation Act, in which we are abolishing all investments on commodity and deforestation, both illegal or illegal. The earth doesn't know how to read the Brazilian forest code, so we are banishing both from our investments. Even there is a legal allowance to promote deforestation in Brazil. We are totally against that. And we are also part of many other efforts, such as IPTT, and there is a coalition of investors to pressure governments to push legislation banishing deforestation and promoting the green economy, and many other efforts that we are committed to apply on 100% of our investments and funds. So it's not an isolated strategy on our ESG funds. It's a cross-fund approach. It's the basics. It's the 101 of our analysis at JGP. And why we're doing that? It's not I could say about principles, values, and ethics, but the pace of change that we need to apply can depend on those. It must depend on something that can be represented on a spreadsheet. You have to understand that the financial sector is very monolingual. So if there is not on the spreadsheet, possibly you not be considered to be a priority. But when you think about the financial sector, well, in Brazil and the global financial sector, it's based on what I like to think there's the 3 R's: risk, reputation, and returns. So even when you look at the situation such as the deforestation risks, we are talking about those 3. When we talk about risk, we are talking about risk of shortage of addressable markets, of addressable capital. We can't be using China as the card up our sleeves all the time. Say, okay, Europe's not that relevant, we can sell to China. It's not like that. We have to figure that we have a Brazilian agriculture is a powerhouse. We can't be picky on the partners that we need, and we can't start thinking that Europe depends on us. It doesn't. Europe doesn't depend on Brazil. There is a global codependence on the countries, and the same way that we can start selling to China, Europe can start buying from others. And trust me, Europe has much more partners than we have for exporting. Europe can choose much more partners than just Brazil. And another thing that is critical for us is the addressable capital. Because when you look at the different markets, Europe can't be the largest market in the world for beef. There's the largest byproduct of the cattle production in Brazil. China can be the largest addressable market, such as Brazil, the domestic consumption. But who has the capital? When you look at the different markets, you can see that China has a very large domestic market that can purchase our goods, but do they have financial sector that can provide us capital for investments? No, they don't. When you want capital, you have to go to Europe. You have to go to United States. You have to source the capital from Brazil. And as an investor, and then we can go to reputation. If a slaughterhouse can't export its goods to Europe, what's the level of trust I have on this company? Imagine the situation. A company comes to my desk and say, okay, I need $10 million. Okay, great. And what's your products? Okay, you have leather, you have beef. Okay, you have a wonderful performance on beef, but leather is not so important. It's just 1%, 2%. But you can't export it to European Union. You're not allowed to do that. No, because of deforestation criteria. Okay, so you are deforesting, so you have a risk. I don't want to be on the front page of any paper. Not in Brazil, not in Iceland, not in any other place. There's a reputation to be protected. So it's not a question of returns, it's a question of reputation. So we talk about risk, we talk about reputation, and our returns. When you look at the figures that you presented, and we understand the margin of the slaughterhouses, each percent matters. So if I have a limitation of addressable markets, a limitation of addressable capital, you're going to have an increase on your cost of capital. You're going to have a reduction on your competitiveness. When I invest in a company, I want the company to grow. I don't want this company to have a strangle on the growth. And as we are quite, historically, European Union is a regulatory powerhouse. So when European Union defines a regulation, it's just a matter of time for everyone starting applying the same regulation. So if European Union is forbidding a company to be attending the market, it'll be a question of time for other markets to do the same. So I know there is sometimes it's very challenging for economies such as Brazil. It's a commodity production company to understand the different levels of complexity of those new times, but the times are changing very fast and we are not changing fast enough. So if you don't, finally, to go to the next question, not bother anyone else with that speech, on a civic level and look at Brazil, we can have an strengthened economy. We can't have an economy that is condemned to wait for its final chapter. There is something that is already happening sometimes in Brazil. When we start looking for subterfuges, when we start figuring that there's any factual basis that indicates that don't have to make any movement, we are ignoring the basics. We are ignoring that the world is now committed to a common cause, to fight climate change, to fight deforestation, to fight biodiversity loss. You can be on the boat, or you can bet your home saying that the world still depends on us. I'm on the boat, and I can assure you that the financial sector, both in Brazil, both the global financial sector, has bought the tickets on this boat as well. When you look at finance for biodiversity, when you look at net zero asset management initiative, when you look at the IBDT, FSTA, all those movements, the numbers just growing. More than 50% of the global financial assets are already aligned to those new criteria. If you don't want to be financed by the financial sector, good luck for you, use your own capital. But most of the times you're going to need external capital. You don't want to depend on 20% of the financial sector. You want to go to 100% of the financial sector. And that is what's happening now. We are having shortage of available capital in midterm and long term.
Thank you, Pugas. Well, I guess we can go to some of the question of the audience, right? The first one is from Marina from Imaflora, right? The question about the structure of the calculation, why the results will be negative, which will be the additional costs. So the way we structure the financial analysis here, Marina, we took the additional cost to dispose the hides that you would be no longer able to sell, right? And also the revenue that you lose if you are no longer able to export to these regions that are being more restrictive regarding deforestation issues, right? In the study, we specify a little bit more the numbers that you use to conduct each analysis, so we try to be the most transparent possible. But if you have any questions about the structure, we can go through the spreadsheets and discuss that in details with you. The other point here is from Ricardo Andrade. Ricardo is from the Centro das Indústrias de Costumes do Brasil, Brazilian Tannery Industry Center. I think that's the best translation. Letter represent 1.8 of beef value, and with this participation, I see no possibility of affecting the results of slaughterhouses. Largest EBITDA contribution comes from processed products. These companies will export less than 3% to the European Union. Yeah, I would say that the number you presented are very much aligned to what we saw from especially the largest slaughterhouse and meatpacking companies such as JBS and Marfrig and Minerva. We have data that the average exports of leather to the European Union is about 22.4%, the last available data that we have. And of course, part of this export, they do not come directly from the slaughterhouse. They go to the tanneries, and from the tanneries, they go to the European Union. Therefore, we analyze the whole picture. But, well, of course, that would be really great to discuss with you the number, to present that you have, and receive the feedbacks that you might have on the calculation of this analysis. It'd be an important feedback for us to improve the quality of what we are doing here. And thank you for your comment. Pulgas, you have something to add?
Yeah, sure. There's a concept that I would like to reinforce. There's called toxic assets. Assets that you can even touch. It can be 0.1% of your revenue. It can be 0.0001 of your total profit. If it's tainted, you are toxic. You are not investable. So look at JPS, for example, and other companies or the slaughterhouses. When look at the total, when look at the controversies that are published on the mainstream media and the reports that are produced by NGOs, identifying some specific cases of deforestation, I totally agree that those cases are isolated or small cases compared to the whole volume of negotiations from those large companies. But still, they are under threat of being toxic, of being tainted by those controversies, by those small occurrences. They're not small at all. Nobody wants to be related to something that will be damaging to your reputation or you're damaging to your policy. Nobody publish a policy that say you can be 1.8% affected by a deforestation policy, but no problem at all. I can invest on the rest of the 99.2% or 98.2%. There's no such thing as that. If you are related to deforestation, if you are forbidden to access a market by regulatory aspects, you are out of market. It's a question of time. I think that is already, when you look at the multiples, there is a economic approach, then you look at the EBITDA, when you look at the results of the company, and there is the multiples in which you are traded on a stock exchange that will define your equity value of the company. When you look at the companies that are under deforestation risk in Brazil, and look at the companies that are our competitors, United States, for example, both companies are listed on the same stock exchange. But even so, even the Brazilian company is much more effective than our American peers or our Australian peers. We are traded 4 times we are 4 to 5 times less competitive on the stock exchange. And the only cause is reputation. It's addressable markets. Most of the funds don't want to invest in Brazilian companies because of those risks. So we can't just disconsidering thinking about the materiality on our profits, on our spreadsheet. It's a question of reputation. It's a question of being toxic, of being uninvestable and untouchable.
Yeah, and there's also another point that I think is relevant, is because when you do the quantitative analysis, especially for credit reasons, we usually look at extreme scenarios. So how much you potentially would lose in case of something like that happen. But of course, the guy who is taking the decision and is deciding to invest or not in one asset, they are not they are not look only to the worst case scenario. I mean, the good scenario, if it's negative, it may be already an imperative for not to invest in some industry and some asset, right? And Tim, please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just to add a little bit to, you know, from our perspective, I think we were really interested in a scenario analysis, and I think we have to recognize that a scenario analysis is both has a quantitative element in which we calculate the potential impact on certain scenarios, but there's also a narrative part of that, which touches on the likelihood of each of those scenarios, right? And I think this is something important to flag, that when we started this research, this was before the EU deforestation regulation was agreed, before it was certain that leather was included in the scope of it. And what we've seen happen since is, you know, something that has substantially increased the likelihood of certain impacts to take place, right? If slaughterhouses in Brazil are unable to meet the due diligence requirements of the as stipulated in this regulation, which means to ensure both the legality and the deforestation-free nature of the entire supply chain, all the way back to the birth farm of the cow, it loses access to this market. And I think this has now become a very, very real scenario. So while you know, as will always be the case when you do forward-looking analysis, numbers may not be completely comprehensive or complete. I think what Pugas was touching on in terms of the sort of unquantifiable reputational impacts, right, or cost of capital, because investors like JGP will be more reluctant to finance certain operations. That's not captured there. So it will never be exact science. But I think that just touching on this increased likelihood of impacts to take place is something important to take away from this study as well.
Yeah, that's nice. Well, I guess we can, if nobody has other questions, we can go to our close remarks, right? We're getting exposed for. Thank you, Ricardo. We'll be in touch. It'll be really nice to discuss this issue in more details with you. And so, well, Pugas seem like to start your closing remarks for this webinar.
Sure. Well, I think that this study, I hope it's first of many, because most of the time, we at the financial sector, as I told you before, we're very spreadsheet oriented. We need to have figures, we need to have awareness of the impacts of those regulations, of those new times that are approaching very fast. So when you don't have this kind of information, we take the bad decisions because we are very far away from the reality. I worked on the last 17 years with the agribusiness industry, on the last 25 years with sustainability. It is not the average of Brazilian market or Brazilian financial sector or any other financial sector in the world. The people there on the financial sector to work for the last 3 decades on the financial sector. They are not exposed to many of the discussions that we have here. So know how to translate impact into finances. It's as critical as the impact sector to understand what the financial sector thinks. So we need to be more bilingual on our relationships between the impact and between the financial world. This study is a very promising new way of communicating on those two sectors. I hope that the next one will be about beef, the another one will be about soy, the other one will be about the critical commodities that we are producing in Brazil without any perception on how damaged our supply chains are and the level of threat that our economy is currently living if we don't do anything to change that as fast as possible.
Thank you, Pugas. Well, I can go, then you go, Tim, right? Well, I think there's a bigger picture here that you have to pay attention. Probably all of you are aware of that, but in Brazil, when it comes to the main sustainability challenges, it's not like, and especially for climate change, we are not talking about energy. Of course, our energy mix can be better, can be more renewable, but land use is the main cause of greenhouse gas emissions in Brazil. And we have the deforestation of the Amazon with high rates over the last few years and steadily increasing rates. And in the center of all that, we have the agribusiness industry that have to cooperate with that, especially the cattle, the beef, and also, of course, the latter in the industry. And it's not something that just one company or one investor will be able to address. It's something very complex. It's something that comes from decades ago. It's like a cultural, structural change that we need to address such big problems, and also educational issues as well. But well, and of course the public authorities have their responsibility, but we have one problem here that we cannot neglect, is that you cannot buy like meat in the supermarket today or animal leather in the shoes footwear store today and be certain that that is not coming from a deforested area in the Amazon or other biomes. Of course, perhaps you can have one specific brand that will be very expensive but not be accessible to the general population. So it's something we have to be paying attention to, have to discuss. And I'd like to thank you everyone who take the time to be here with us today talking about this very important matter. And if you have some question, have something to add, something to you disagree about our analysis, our rationale, to contact us. We'll be happy to talk with you about that, because it's a very serious issue. That's something we really need to address, be working on if you want to accomplish the targets and have a better future, right?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think the last words of Pugas are important. As fast as possible. This is our sentiment too. It's this feeling of urgency, you know. Both from a climate perspective, I think the most recent IPCC report just emphasized something that we all knew already, is that there is no pathway towards 1.5 degree without keeping remaining forest standing. And keeping remaining forest standing has much higher value than reforesting. And I think this is something that we really need to take note of, also from a biodiversity perspective, also from a social perspective. And it's just the sense of urgency that really drives us to continue doing this work. And I think what Pugas said about your spreadsheet focus, I think this is exactly, you know, one of the underlying reasons why we're doing these type of commissioning these type of studies is it isn't just civil society organizations that need to care about this. It is the economic decision makers that need to integrate this as well. And the world needs it, you know. From a European perspective, this is extremely encouraging to see this type of discussion taking place. We think it's an excellent report. We really want to thank Gustavo and his entire team for this work. It's been a great study, extremely insightful, really useful for our work. And I completely agree with what you're saying, Gustavo. We need to continue this discussion, have it open, have it frank, be open to other perspectives, and really take this forward as fast as we can. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a great day and week. And well, see you soon.
Bye-bye.